Good evening, everyone from all over the world. We're really happy you were able to join us this evening. Actually, it's been quite a long academic year full of online meetings and lots of commitments. So we thought it would be nice to bring everyone together and invite you to unwind with live Irish music with Gerry O'Connor. This cultural event is hosted by the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and organized by the Research Centre for Irish Studies at the British University in Egypt. The program is funded through the Embassy of Ireland Cultural Outreach Program grant. Thanks are due to the Embassy of Ireland in Egypt and especially to His Excellency Ambassador Seán O'Regan. Irish Ambassador to Egypt, Seán O'Regan, has been supporting our academic and cultural events actually since 2019. And the Embassy of Ireland has an exceptionally good working relationship with the British University in Egypt. I'd like to thank Dr. Rania Khalil, Acting Director of the Research Centre for Irish Studies, and our academic staff member in the Department of English Language and Literature in the Faculty of Arts at the BUE. We really thank her for her efforts and her initiative, and we do value this collaborative relationship with the Embassy of Ireland, and we give it our full support. Well, this evening's program is in two parts. It starts with an opening word by His Ambassador. The second part is the live online fiddle music by renowned Irish musician Gerry O'Connor. Dr. Rania, could you please let us hear His Excellency's words here? Sure. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Seán O'Regan. I'm the Irish Ambassador to Egypt. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening, and I'm glad you're joining us. We have a very, very good working relationship with the BUE, and in particular with the Research Centre for Irish Studies, the new Research Centre. I'm delighted that we're able to support that centre, and we'll continue to do so. It's an important development for us in the embassy, but also more widely in the region. I think it offers great opportunities to increase knowledge and understanding of Irish issues, right through the Middle East, North Africa, and right into the continent of Africa. And I'm really, really happy that we're supporting this program from the embassy's cultural outreach program. And I hope that we are able to continue to give such support. And finally, I'd like to thank the BUE, the senior management at BUE, but in particular the Faculty of Arts and Humanities for facilitating this performance. Gerry O'Connor is a brilliant fiddler and comes from a very distinguished musical family in Ireland, and I hope you enjoy his performance as much as I'm going to. Good evening.
Thank you, Rania. Ambassador O'Regan said Gerry O'Connor comes from a family of traditional Irish fiddle musicians. He has traveled the world playing solo and with bands. He co-founded Skylark. I mean, maybe Gerry, you can tell us more about it. And you will share with us your cultural journey through your fiddle music.
I'm very happy to be playing some of my music to you in Cairo tonight. My name is Gerry O'Connor. I'm a fiddle player. I've been a musician, professional musician for most of my working life. I didn't start out as a professional musician. My mother was my fiddle teacher and I went into industry, but I kept getting pulled back to the music for all my holidays and all my free time. And I got the opportunity to study violin making, as you see what I do here, after my career in industrial engineering, so in a mining company and shoe manufacturer. So my life revolves around music and violin repairs and supporting the art, the musicians, the stringed music community in my area. That's what I do. I've made about 14 different albums, and I've played guests on hundreds of others. So it's been a busy 62 years of my life playing. Well, 56 years playing on music. My mother was my first teacher. Her 4 sisters and her brother all played fiddle, and she'd one sister who played the accordion. We never understood that, but all fiddle players, all musicians, and her parents also played music. So in my particular case, the music that come down, the traditional music come down on the maternal side, and that's my mother there. We're playing in a local bar at one time way back. It's unfortunate she passed away, and we never got many recordings of her playing because she suffered from arthritis and rheumatism, and she taught many of the wonderful fiddle players playing today in Ireland. She learned from her father and her mother. Her father played fiddle and flute, and her mother played fiddle and concertina. Farming people from the County Meath, which is near the middle of Ireland, and they moved to Dundalk and met her husband for economic reasons. She moved to Dundalk. Her brother-in-law had a Ceilidh band. He married her younger sister, and she started playing in his Ceilidh band. So I think I'll start off playing some tunes I learned from my mother, and I'll play it with a tune that's her aunt, my great aunt, had a collection of dance music. And they would have played we talk about Irish music as being dance music. We played reels, jigs, hornpipes, compound duple rhythms, barn dances, tunes that are all danceable. And even in my grandaunt's day, they would have played sort of song tunes and a variety of stuff. It's become a bit more formalized now to reels, jigs and that. But they would have played popular songs, various songs coming in from old recordings. So I'll play a tune I would have played with my mother. It's a tune called the Kinnigan Slashers. I'm just looking at my order of tunes here. Yeah. And I'll play a tune after from my grandaunt's collection. It's called Le Garçon de Volage. The fiddle, as you know, this is the standard modern violin. We play violin fiddle. It comes from the same word, the old word viol, violin, viol, fiddle. And basically, the instrument is called a fiddle in folk music generally, and in classical Western art music is often referred to as the violin, but exactly the same. There was a bowed stringed instrument in Irish music back in the 11th century. There's carvings on the great Celtic crosses of bowed stringed instruments, but we generally play the modern violin these days in Ireland. The pipes are probably the most unique of Irish instruments. The uilleann pipes, the elbow pipes, rather than the bagpipes, which are blown. The uilleann pipes are played with the elbow. And of course, the symbol of Ireland, the harp, is a very ancient instrument in Ireland as well. And a lot of our music comes from the harpists who wrote the music back at the end of the great Gaelic where the Irish were still in control of the country back in 1700s, 1600s. And we'll talk about that later on. But I play the modern violin, and I'll play tunes now. This is a dance rhythm. It's a jig, 6/8 time, compound duple. And the first tune is called the Kinnigan Slashers, and I'll follow it with a tune called the Garçon Volage, which is also, as I say, the fiddle is very universal. It's played all over the world, in all cultures. And the second tune I'll play here comes from the French-Canadian culture. And it's a little tune that came into Ireland, and it's from Scotland as well. So this dance music we play, especially in the Celtic nations, Celtic countries like Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cape Breton. We all have a familiar dance music. Scottish-Irish music, there's a huge overlap, especially in the reels. So 2 jigs. I have to settle myself down after racing down the road and back again. So I'll try not to play too fast. 2 jigs. Okay. much. There were 2 jigs there, 2 3-part jigs, thank you. And the first tune was the Kinnigan Slashers, learned from the playing of my mother, and the second tune from my granddad, the Garson Volage, or the Fickle Lad. Well, I grew up in a home, as I mentioned, with lots of music, and Dundalk is on the east coast of Ireland, between Dublin and Belfast, 1 hour to Dublin, 1 hour to Belfast, roughly. Sort of a post-industrial town, a college town now, and administrative town. We were just regular kids growing up, but my mother, because she played music, we were sort of drawn to the traditional music. I was also an Irish dancer growing up. Dancing was a very popular activity in young children. You might be familiar with the river dance. And in my particular town, we had a very strong dance teacher, a strong dance team. And quite a few of the dancers led river dance after Flatley. It came from my hometown. Actually, the captain for about 15 years, let's say the supervisor of the dancers was from my town. So I grew up at the age of 3.5 dancing, and I was very lucky because I was always playing with better musicians than me, older musicians. So I was always the baby. In the Cayley band, I was 8-year-old in an under 18 Cayley band, and in the little show, I was the youngest. The youngest being 14, I think I was, and the oldest was John Joe Gardner, an old fiddle player. And John Joe was originally from County Sligo, and he would have played with many of the iconic figures in traditional music, the very first recording musicians. When Irish musicians emigrated at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, they went to New York, and like many immigrant communities were recorded there to make albums for the ethnic minorities in North America. And Michael Coleman was one of these first and most famous of these recordings. Like, they would have been like the first people on the internet, basically. Michael Coleman, James Morrison, Paddy Cloran, all musicians from the same little area of Sligo in the northwest of Ireland, just below Donegal. Just a little. If you imagine Ireland as being a teddy bear, this is the head, this is Ulster, and Sligo would be in here, and I live at the back of the, if you imagine, I'm at the back of the teddy bear's neck. If you can just imagine Ireland like that. Ireland is 300 miles long, 500 kilometers. It's roughly 200 miles wide. It's a small country, but pretty densely populated for such a small island. But we have a diaspora of 40 million people around the world who declare themselves Irish. Irish Americans, Irish Canadians, Irish Australian. So we have a fantastic network around the world for our folk music and for our culture. But back to North America, where Michael Coleman and James Morrison recorded. Before they went to America back in 1920, they would have not recorded, but they would have played with this gentleman I played with, John Joe Gardner. And I'll play 2 tunes I used to play with John Joe when I was in my teens in a little show. And I'll play this dance rhythm. It's the fastest and the most lively and probably the most popular of all dance rhythms. It's the reel. And the reel is basically, it's a common time, 4/4 time. And often the tunes, I should mention, we play 8 bars and repeat 8 bars, and then we play another 8 bars and repeat that 8 bars with variations. And that would be the standard 2-part tune, and you generally play it twice, and then you move on to the next tune. There's no particular reason why we put tunes together. Often it could be just a title that sounds familiar. We used to play tunes, the London Lassies and the Fermoy Lassies, just because the word lassies was common. These 2 tunes, John Joe used to play them together, and I think they were recorded by the famous Michael Coleman at some point. So there's a Sligo style of fiddle playing. It varies from the north to the south. In the north counties of Ireland, it's a very staccato, sort of Scottish style of rhythm. As you go down through the country, it gets a little bit more legato. And this style of music I play is sort of in between. It's a bit legato, and it's I consider dancing as a very important part of our music. Some people prefer to play a listening music. I prefer, growing up as a dancer, I prefer the vibrancy and the lift of dance music. So I'll play these 2 tunes that I played with John Joe Gardner, who played them with Michael Coleman. So this music goes right back to the turn of the last century, of the 19th century, really. I'm making us all feel very old here suddenly. So the 2 reels. The first tune is called The Star of Munster, KFA minor, and the second tune is a great tune called The Boys of the Loch. Okay. Thank you very much. The Boys of Luck, and preceded by a great tune called The Star of Munster. Munster being one of the southern provinces of Ireland. You have Ulster, Munster, Leinster and Connacht. Yeah, East, Leinster, Connacht in the west. So I live on the east, on the northeast of Ireland, on very close to the border with the modern border of Northern Ireland. And at one time, this was all the one region. We would call it the Oriel region. Some of the old regions in the county. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. So you can see Ireland, the shape of a teddy bear. I was talking about the little, where the throat is. That's where that last tune came from. I live sort of at the back of, on the dip in there on the east coast. Yep, up there. It's 1 hour to Dublin. I mentioned 1 hour to Belfast, and this region would have been one of the old kingdoms we had down in Kerry. In Cork, you would have had Nadesha, and in Waterford area, you would have had Nadesha, Muskerry in Cork, and you had Dalriada up in where Antrim is now. But with the plantation of Ireland and division of the country up by the British administration, there were formed counties. So the counties, although are pretty, that's what we work with today. The older kingdom and the older regions would have been what we identify with. Where I live in County Louth, North County Louth, and it borders onto South Armagh and into East Monaghan. These are all counties bordering. That's small. Louth is the smallest county in Ireland. On Cunda is Lou. It's County Louth, and it's often called the wee county. It's a bit of a play on the word in Irish. Lou was the king, was the god of creativity. And he gave his name to Leiden and maybe London and Carlisle and Leuven, and many European towns took their name from this famous god. And because he was a god of creativity, and he gave his name to County Louth. And Louth is also the home of the greatest mythological story in Ireland, the Táin Cooley, the Brown Bull of Cooley, the Cattle Raid of Cooley, where Queen Maeve came from the west over to where, just literally where I live, up the hill behind me. And there was a battle went on for months, and we always thought it was only a short period, but research has shown that she was here, her army spent a long time here. And there was a hero called Cuchulainn, and he defended Ulster. And when she put a curse on the men of Ulster made her run a race that she shouldn't have made run, and her pregnant, and she cursed all the men of Ulster. But if Cuchulainn, because he wasn't technically born in Ulster, he didn't suffer from the curse. So he was left to defend Ulster from the Connacht men who wanted to take the bull. And eventually he killed most of the one-to-one combatants, and eventually he was killed outside Dundalk here. And this is a great story that goes on, and the story was handed down for generations. So the mythology, it was Ogloon go gloon, as they say in Irish, from knee to knee. The story was carried from one generation to the next until it was written down, I think, in about the 11th century in the Brown, in the Book of Leinster, I think. And then it became a bit more of a document. But this area, I'll just move on a few hundred years. With the plantation of Ulster, Ulster became, it was occupied by the English when the chieftains of Ireland were driven out after the Battle of Kinsale in the south. Anyway, the British occupied the northern part of the country and called it plantation, and drove a lot of the native Irish out. And a lot of the Irish moved down into the Badlands of South Ulster, roughly where we are, in the Oriel region. And all the great poets and writers of the time moved into the area, into the Badlands, and became poor scholars, hedge school teachers and poets living on their wits. And we had a lot of poets in the area. In this area, this Oriel region carries this tradition still today. And we have people like Seamus Dawn McCourt, the blind Seamus McCourt, Art McCooey, great poets who lived across the mountain. And this was about 1700s up to the 1800s. The Gaelic language was still spoken in this area until up till 1960. A lady called O'Hanlon lived across the mountain from me here. I play an air from the area. It's called Urcanach Céin de Concha. You can work on your Irish for that one. Urcanach means it's magical hill of Cain, a little hill outside Dundalk in my hometown here. And the poets used to gather in the evening. I suppose you'd call it a university conference these days. But these boys used to gather on a summer's evening and recite their poetry to each other. And the story goes that O'Durneen, one of these poets, Pedro O'Durneen, who wrote this poem, he had a fancy, he had an eye for a woman who lived across the valley in a little house. And he'd recite the poem in her direction to try and curry favour with her. But for his efforts, she'd close her windows. So I don't think she loves him somehow. But anyway, it's a great air, beautiful air called Urcanach Céin de Concha, the fairy or the magic hill of Cain. So this is a slow air in the Gaelic language, and it's a well-known song, and that's one of my favourite tunes. Urcanach Céin de Concha, the fairy hill of Cain. And the music was put to a poem of Pedro O'Durneen's, and the man who put the music to it was a man I actually met, a man called Pedro Duda, who would have been one of these collectors. At the turn of the century, with the rise of nationalism and cultural awareness, a lot of people were re-identifying themselves with their own native cultures, and it happened right across the world, especially in Europe at the time. And there was a big revival in the Gaelic language, and there was organisations like the Conradh Gaeilge to re-encourage the learning of Irish. And Pedro Duda, who put the melody to that tune, was a Gaelic teacher and a small local politician and teacher and photographer. And he sort of was of great interest in keeping the culture alive. I met him when I used to be going to Irish dancing. He'd come and speak Gaelic to us, and we didn't speak Gaelic at the time. I speak Gaelic now. My children all speak Gaelic, first language, but it wasn't my first language. But he'd try and encourage us to identify with our own culture, and we realise now the wealth of it, that we have a very rich culture, and it's with BUE and organisations around the world, it's been well documented and supported. So we're very privileged, I suppose, to have this sort of support for our culture. It's an accessible culture. We have the great poets, Patrick Kavanagh and Heaney, and we have James Joyce and Samuel Beckett. Actually, Samuel Beckett said something which the program I'm playing tonight is it's sort of based on my personal experience and the way it translates across the culture. Beckett one time said, he says, make the parochial universal, and people, it helps explain things, and that's what I'm probably trying to do. Is what my experience in the music, it sort of covers a lot of ground, and hopefully it puts a sort of personal touch on my experience of the development of traditional music and my experience of living through it. A relation of mine wrote a book one time. It's a man called Eamon Devlin in Irish. He wrote it. He says, the history of a townland, the history of a little parish, he says, is a history of a nation. So basically, my little story is basically partly telling the story of traditional music through my experiences. So part of my experience was growing up that I was passing a pub in Dundalk one day, which was a Dundalk, on being on the border, had a lot of political connections, people would staying here and coming and going. And the pub I was passing was known for music, traditional music, but the door was always closed. You had to be invited in because there was a lot of strange people around the town. It was a bit Wild West, I suppose you'd describe it. But this day the door was open and I could hear this music coming out, and I went in, and a lot of people I knew were there. They were all musicians and friends of musicians. And it turned out the local fiddle player had passed away and was being buried that weekend. And so they had a big session for him. So I walked in and they recognized me, and I was handed the fiddle, and I became the resident musician. The fiddle player who died was Peter McCardle, and musicians would have come from Belfast and Dublin to listen to him play. He was actually recorded and documented by the famous collector Brendan Brannock, whose collection of music is one of the standard books we use in Irish music. Ceol Rinkin a Heron Iver Hain Those the Tree, the Dance Music of Ireland, number 1, 2 and 3, and there's 4 and 5 now. But he would have done a lot of work collecting music throughout instrumental music throughout the country. So I'll play a few tunes that Peter would have played. These are single jigs. I'm going to change the rhythm again a little. A single jig is there's different types of jig. I played a double jig earlier on. That's a 6/8. This is like a 12/8. It's like a slide. It's a bit of there's a longer measure, there's a longer motif on it. But it's 12/8 anyway. We also have slip jigs. I might try and get around to one in a wee while. But this is a single jig. And Peter had unusual names on his tunes. He called the first one The Day the Ass Ran Away, The Day the Donkey Ran Away. And the second tune is one of the Lancers, an old English dance we talk about going from the big house, upstairs in the house, to downstairs in the big house, where the popular classical music at the time was played in the landlord's house. And then in the kitchens, the servants would be listening to this music and they would be adapting it to suit their own rhythms and that. So this was originally known in England as the Duchess of Dorchester's Lancer, but he didn't have a name. He just called it one of the Lancers. And the last tune, we have titles on some of our tunes. We try and have titles on most that we can when we play them. A lot of dance music titles don't really mean anything. You can have Upstairs in a Tent, which absolutely means nothing. But it's just a reference to a tune. Songs are a bit different because they tell a story. But this particular tune, Peter had a brother called Tommy, and brothers, as you know, brothers don't really agree on everything, or maybe anything. But one brother called this tune, Peter called it Get Up, Old Woman, and Shake Yourself. And his brother had a different take on the same tune and a different take on the situation. He called it Tickle Her Leg with the Barley Straw. So a little, I played it a set as little single jigs, okay. And these are from Peter McCardle. And he played in this bar called Mark's Bar. You might have an image there of a bar, the musicians playing, and you could smoke in the bars in those days. But it was a great bar for music. People like the Dubliners and the Clancy brothers all passed through. The Chieftains played there. Planksty played across the road in the town hall. There was always music passing forth. So it was a good education for me. Not all good education, but an education, let's say. Okay, single jigs. Single jigs, thank you very much. Starting with Today the Ass Run Away, one of the Lancers, and finishing the set with a tune called Tickle Her Leg with the Barley Straw. Okay, well, I mentioned I was playing in this bar. I became the resident musician, and lots of musicians coming in and out, and I was very lucky to meet so many good musicians. I was still quite young, so people were very good to me. And there was a gentleman come in one day, and he gave me a photocopy of a collection of music. He said, you might be interested in that. And there was a collection of from a local. I mentioned earlier on the way that there was the revival, cultural revival at the turn of the century, and there was an organisation, a society set up in Dundalk here called the Louth Archaeological Society, and it was basically to document and preserve all our artifacts. We don't have any pyramids around here, but we have Newgrange right down the road, which is only about 20 minutes away travel, but we have a lot of standing stones, dolmens, and all this. And so this organisation was to document that, and also the music and the culture. And there was an article published by a man called Luke Donlan, the Reverend Luke Donlan, who was a local priest. He had an interest in the culture, obviously, in the language, and he actually had access to a car back in 1900s. 1909, definitely, and he had access to an Edophone, an old Edophone. It's like an old gramophone, and it was mechanical recording of voices, and he documented and he recorded old singers in the area. And Patrick and Ulicon has published a great book called Hidden Ulster, and many of the songs are in this. But he also collected he collected some of the dance music from the area. And he published a small section of it in the 1909 edition. And I was given this photocopy, and I played through it a number of times. And I began to find tunes we were interested in and sort of create a local identity. Traditional music is played all over the world, as maybe you may be aware or not. But sometimes it's nice to find tunes and music from your own area, just to be able to, like this, to dig in a little bit deeper. And when I was doing a master's in the college in Dundalk here, I was teaching there for 5 years in the DKI, Dundalk Institute of Technology. I did a master's under Dr. Fintan Vallely. Fintan has published the definitive Encyclopedia of Irish Music. It's about 800 pages, and it's, if you want to know anything about Irish music, Fintan has it all covered, and he had 700 contributors to the collection, 700 experts, amateur collectors, people who maybe never went to college but had great knowledge, as well as academic scholars involved, but he covered the range of music. So Fintan was my supervisor, and we dug out and found a bigger collection of the music, and I published, this was part of my master's collection, was the book called A Rose in the Gap, and it was 287 tunes of music from the area. And I mentioned you see that the gap in the middle there is the gap of the north, where it was the big route from north to south, and it went right down to from Armagh down to Tara, where the Kings, it was basically the highway. Well, it was on the highway around Ireland. So that's a Swedish friend of mine painted that. And this music comes from this area. And I like to think of the gap in the Rose in the Gap. My mother's name was Rose, actually. And the Rose in the Gap is the tune in it. And a rose in a gap is a flower in a very vulnerable place. It shouldn't be, if it's in a gap, cows or horses could trample it. So the rose has to be protected. So that's, it's very hard to, that's why I prefer to learn all the tunes. A collection of the tunes of the area, and all, you can maybe click through. You might have some images there, Rania. This is the priest in the back, which he was the man who was responsible for saving the book. Now, I believe that's the original handwritten scripts there, and that's the tune that I'm showing you, on Russia Atá. That means the rose that was on. And these were tunes were written out very, basically like shorthand. The person who wrote this book, I gather it was a male, because women wouldn't have time to write down 280, to learn them and go around collecting them. And that's no harm. They were probably working harder than this musician ever did. But they would write out bar 1 to 4, and then he would skip to bar 8, because bar 5, 6, 7 would often be the same. This book wasn't written as a teaching aid; it was written as a memory aid. So to have 287 tunes in your head, it's not unusual. But to have written them down, and to this skill, with this skill, it's amazing. And you see the lines, that the rastography was all handwritten. Not a trained musician, but a careful musician. I believe a very astute musician, maybe not educated, but very bright. Everything, I found no notes that weren't playable. All the tunes are playable. So I basically compiled it and edited and tidied up a bit and published it as a collection of dance music from the area. So I'll play some hornpipes from the collection. This first tune I learned way back. It probably was the first tune I learned. It's called Sterling Tom, and I'll follow it with a little tune. It's not in the collection, but it's a tune I like to play with it, called Andy Carnes. I learned this from a great friend of mine, Cathal McConnell, a flute player who I published a book on his songs as well, but we'll talk about it some other day. So 2 hornpipes, starting with Sterling Tom. Sterling Tom and Andy Clarence. Okay, I'll just take a little break and say nothing and play a few reels. These are tunes I thought I learned from my sister, but she said she learned them from me. It's the way music goes, where it's a funny little word. People talk about styles in music. It's mostly talk about fiddle styles. I mentioned a very strict Donegal, sort of the Scottish even notes. Sligo would be a bit more varied. Clare music would be a bit more legato. Use a lot more ties and all that. So these are pretty popular tunes that I just like to play, called Three Reels, Bonnie Ann, Traverse Reel, and the last tune is called Sporting Nell. Thank you very much. 3 reels there. Bonnie Ann, it's a tune from Country Fermanagh from a friend of mine. Travers, a well-known tune, flute players like that one. And the last tune called Sporting Nell, 3 well-known popular session tunes. And the session is an interesting little dynamic in that people can sit down together and play a common body of tunes. It's like telling stories to each other and sharing stories, but you know the story, but you hear somebody put a little twist on it, a wee turn. Within reason, it's a bit like jazz in that you play the melody sometimes and then you twist it a little bit, but you don't go beyond the boundaries. It's a funny little game. But the session dynamic is interesting as well. When I was growing up, you'd listen to the older musicians. You wouldn't even play. You'd just listen unless you were asked to play. They might ask you to play one and then they'd say, that was pretty good. Keep practicing, boy, you know. Whereas now everybody comes out, they're all experts, they've all studied YouTube and they're all geniuses. And we spend a lot of time teaching individuals. I mean, my last lesson as a student was my mother when I was 12, and then I played with John Gardner. And then we have this summer school, I just finished teaching in it today, in the Willie Clancy Summer School in the west of Ireland. Willie Clancy was a piper from Clare, and he lived in London for a number of years, a great scholar in music. But they have a summer school. I was sent down there when I was, well, it sounds like I was going to prison. I was sent there when I was 15 on the very first, and I had Sean Keane of the Chieftains, famous Chieftains band. He was a great fiddle player, still is, and I studied with him for a week, and looking at his music over the years, I think I must have learned a lot. I learned lots of things there that week, but fiddle class was interesting. So anyway, there were a few reels I would have been. The sessions, sort of people sit together and play together, and you try and find common tunes. It's an inclusive. It should be an inclusive experience, and it's a great fun. You can find an Irish session in most towns around the world. There's a website out there called session.org, and somebody says, I'm going to South Africa for a month, any sessions? And somebody from South Africa says, oh, there's a session here, or I'm going out to Oman or somewhere, oh, there's a session. And so it's a great community of people, and they might be working in professional jobs, most are, but they still play their music for fun. I used to teach a guy, he was a director of a major fruit company, and he wouldn't have meetings on a Monday night. He says, that's my fiddle night. The music saved my life so many times, he says. So everybody has their own way of getting through it. So anyway, there were a few dance tunes, that's very bright and fancy tunes. Well, I was mentioning about the Gaelic speakers in the country, and in the old days, the collecting was very important to preserve the language and the culture. And I'll play a tune that was collected in County Tyrone, the foothills of the Tyrone. The Gaelic language was, as in most cultures, with the occupier that pushed the natives into the poor land, and these people lived on the side of a mountain in the middle of Ulster in County Tyrone, and brother and sister, Mary and Nancy Tracy, and there was a gentleman from the area here, a school teacher, inspector, who used to collect the songs, a man called Henry Morris or Henry O'Wersa, and he published hundreds of songs of singers on the area. Most of these collectors were interested in the songs for the Gaelic language, for the poetry, not so much for the melodies. My late wife, Edna O'Connor, her father collected songs as well, and he was a scholar, and he was a school inspector. But when he was younger, he'd collect the songs, and people would say to him, well, what about, you're not writing down the melodies of the songs? And he says, but everybody knows the melodies. And there was this sort of taking that you knew the melody, but the words, the fine words, the artistic writing of the song would be lost. So not all didn't write them down, but some didn't write down the melodies because they were more interested in the poetry than the melodies. But this song I'm going to play now, it's a melody. The melody actually was written by my late wife, Edna O'Connor, and but the poem is a story of a man and a woman. It's the usual. It's a love lost. He hasn't been a very good partner, and his young bride or wife or girlfriend decides to leave him for a younger man, and he's very upset, of course. But being a musician, he decides to write a poem for her. And in the poem, he says, in the Gaelic language, he says, "Oh, is I'll sing a little. His father la moon me, his father la moon me, Jimmy she, my beautiful young woman, she's gone. She's left me. She's left me with all her money and her credit card and her gold. And he's heartbroken, of course, you know. And he even promises to stop drinking alcohol. The poor fella, he must have been in a terrible state. He had no money, obviously, so he had no money for alcohol. But and it's a lovely song. It's collected from this couple, Eamon and Nancy, up in the Sperrin Mountains, collected by Henry Morris. And a song called Mall One Ní Cuileann, Fair Molly Hollywood. She's gone, my beautiful woman, Fair Molly Hollywood of the Curls. Mall One Ní Cuileann. I want to put a reel before it called The Destitution, just to compound his misery. It's a tune written by a friend of mine. A lot of traditional music is old, obviously, but there's some newly written tunes. People are writing tunes all the time, and some good tunes stick, and sometimes they stick because they fit into the tradition very well. It's a bit like writing poetry in an old-fashioned style. So this, I played a Mall One Ní Cuileann, Fair Molly Hollywood, and I'll wrap it in the Destitution reel. Mall One Ní Cuileann, Fair Molly Hollywood, and The Destitution reel written by Ian Stevenson. So yeah, very sad. Okay, maybe I'll play a few lively reels and keep it going. These are tunes again from the collection, 3 reels from the book, Cottage in the Grove, The Dandy Reel, and Over the Bridge to Beta. So. Three reels, starting off with Cottage in the Grove, the Dandy reel, and the last reel, Over the Bridge to Beta. And they're all tunes from the collection, The Rose in the Gap, which contains, I think, about 120, 160 reels, I think. And there's also song tunes. It was a body of tunes, as I mentioned earlier on. It was probably collected at the end of the 19th century, because you have something like Stephen Foster's "Oh Susanna" in it. Oh Susanna, don't you write for me? So it was obviously popular. In my aunt's collection, I mentioned earlier on, the first tune in it was "The King of the Cannibal Islands." You know, people were not so fussy about what style of tunes they were playing. Once you could play music, it didn't really matter. It was important just to remember how it went. And so yeah, there's also song tunes, there's hornpipes, and there's airs, and there's old military marches as well. So you can see the big connection between Irish music and the Scottish music where we live. It's a total overlap. There was dances in the area. There's a tune in it called Bessie Black, and I know a new man who he didn't dance it, but he knew it to dance, and it's published in a wonderful collection of music from North County Down by a friend of mine, Nigel Boulier, in a book called Hand It Down. So the dance music was cross-community. It was very much a cross-community effort, and social music. This dance music, social music, was very much a recreational activity. So I'll play maybe a final little tune from the book. It's called "The Rose in the Gap," the title, And maybe what I did, as I said, the tunes were accurately written, but not written by a trained musician, let's say. So a lot of the tunes were written in 4/4 time, whether it was 2/4 time or split common time. I'm not sure. As I say, it was for a musician that knew his music, not for somebody to learn it from. But I arranged it as a tune as an air and as a march and back into the air. So it would be like this. The title tune of the book is called A Rose in the Gap. And then I'll be winding up soon after that. So I don't want to keep you all too late. I realized we were off to a crazy start. I appreciate all and your patience and all this. So The Rose in the Gap. The rose in the gap, or Russia atá Savannah in the Gaelic. I think I might have to take a small libation after this number. I'll play a little reel called "Made Behind the Bar," especially for, not suggesting that you ever be behind the bar, not Rania, but just in honor of you, a tune called "Made Behind the Bar," and I'll follow it then with a tune called "Paddy Ryan's Dream," and the last tune I'll play is "Music in the Glen," which is appropriate for tonight. So I hope you all have a good weekend, and thanks for making all this possible. Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Dr. Shadia, and everybody at BUE, and thank you. Romina Michaels, agus Silicon Winship Saltmore, Asaniha, Asan Kiol, agus an Desha Vigum, Kiol Corvacor Iverlacher. So that is just saying thank you for tuning in and being with me. And to Silicon Gabunami Reach. To Silicon Memories View and I'm sure Reach. Maybe all be alive this time next year. Slán, Romina Michaels. Thank you very much. Merci bien. And
thank you very much for this lively and charming evening, and for taking us through this cultural journey with the fiddle music. It's a pity we couldn't dance to this lovely music, really.
Oh.
Yeah.
Next time, we'll have it live. I'll teach you a few simple dances the next time. It's very easy.
Thank you, Dr. Rania, for this opportunity, and thanks to Ambassador O'Regan for his continuous support. We enjoyed this very much, and thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it. We did.